Parsha 9. Vayeshev. He continued living. Bereshit 37:1 through 40:23. Yaakov continued living in the land where his father had lived as a foreigner, the land of Canaan. Here's the story of Yaakov. When Joseph was 17 years old, he used to pasture the flocks with his brothers, even though he was still a boy. Once, when he was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, he brought a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph the most of all of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long-sleeved robe. When his brothers saw that his father loved him more than all his brothers, they began to hate him, and reached the point where they couldn't even talk with him in a civil manner. Joseph had a dream which he told his brothers, and that made them hate him all the more. He said to them, "Listen, while I tell you about this dream of mine. We were tying up bundles of wheat in the field, when suddenly my bundle got up by itself and stood upright. Then your bundles came, gathered around mine, and prostrated themselves before it." His brothers retorted, "Yes, you will certainly be our king. You'll do a great job of bossing us around." And they hated him still more for his dreams and for what he said. He had another dream which he told his brothers. "Here, I had another dream, and there was the sun, the moon, and 11 stars prostrating themselves before me." He told his father, too, as well as his brothers, but his father rebuked him. "What is this dream you have? Do you really expect me, your mother, and your brothers to come and prostrate ourselves before you on the ground?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his fathers kept the matter in mind. After this, when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's sheep in Shechem, Israel asked Joseph, "Aren't your brothers pasturing the sheep in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." He said to him, "Go now, see whether things are going well with your brothers and with the sheep, and bring word back to me." So he sent him away from the Hebron valley, and he went to Shechem, where a man found him wandering around the countryside. The man asked, "What are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my brothers," he answered. "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the sheep?" The man answered, "They have left here because I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. They spotted him in the distance, and before he had arrived where they were already plotting to kill him. They said to each other, "Look, this dreamer is coming. So come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these water cisterns here. Then we'll say some wild animal devoured him. We'll see then what becomes of his dreams." But then Reuben heard this. He saved him from being destroyed by them. He said, "We shouldn't take his life. Don't shed blood." Reuben added by them, "Throw him into the cistern here in the wilds, but don't lay hands on him yourselves." He intended to rescue him from them later and restore him to his father. So it was that when Joseph arrived to be with his brothers, they stripped off his robe, the long-sleeved robe he was wearing, and took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, without any water in it. Then they sat down to eat their meal. But as they looked up, they saw in front of them a caravan of Ishmaelim coming from Gilead, their camels loaded with aromatic gum, healing resin, opium on their way down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What advantage is it to us if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelim instead of putting him to death with our own hands. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh." His brothers paid attention to him. So when the Midian merchants passed by, they drew and lifted Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 1/2 pound of silver shekels to the Ishmaelim, who took Joseph on to Egypt. Reuben returned to the cistern, and upon seeing that Joseph wasn't in it, tore his clothes in mourning. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I go now?" They took Joseph's robe, killed a male goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. Then they sent the long-sleeved robe and brought it to their father, saying, "We found this. Do you know if it's your son's robe or not?" He recognized it and cried, "It's my son's robe. Some wild animal has torn Joseph in pieces and eaten him." Yaakov tore his clothes, and putting sackcloth around his waist, mourned his son for many days. Though all his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, he refused all consolation, saying, "No, I will go down to the grave, to my son, mourning." And his father wept for him. In Egypt, Midian sold Joseph to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, a captain of the guard. It was at this time that Judah went off from his brothers and settled near a man named Hira, who was in Adullamai. There Judah saw one of the daughters of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua, and he took her and slept with her. She conceived and had a son, whom he named Er. She conceived again and had a son, and she called him Onan. Then she conceived yet again and had a son, whom she called Shelah. This was in Kislev, when she gave birth to him. Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Er, Judah's firstborn, was evil from Adonai's perspective, so Adonai killed him. Judah said to Onan, "Go and sleep with your brother's wife. Perform the duty of a husband's brother to her, and preserve your brother's line of descent." However, Onan knew that the child would not count as his, so whenever he had intercourse with his brother's wife, he spilled the semen on the ground, so as not to give his brother offspring. What he did was evil from Adonai's perspective, so he killed him too. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Stay a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought, "I don't want him to die too like his brothers." So Tamar went and lived at her home with her father. In due time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. After Judah had been comforted, he went up to be with his sheep-shearers in Timnah. He and his friend Hira, the Adullamite, Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law had gone up to Tamar to shear his sheep." So she took off her widow's clothes, completely covered her face with her veil, and sat at the entrance of Enayim, which is on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, but she was still not being given to him as his wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, because she had covered her face. So he went over to her where she was sitting and said, not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, "Come, let me sleep with you." She answered, "What will you pay me to sleep with me?" He said, "I will send you a kid from the flock of goats." She said, "Will you also give me something as a guarantee until you send it?" He answered, "What should I give you as a guarantee?" She said, "Your seal, with its cord and the staff you're carrying in your hand." So he gave them to her, then went and slept with her, and she conceived by him. She got up and went away, took off her veil, and put on her widow's clothes. Judah sent the kid with his friend, the Adullamite, to receive the guaranteed items back from the woman, but he couldn't find her. He asked the people near where she had been, "Where is the prostitute who was on the road to Enam?" And they answered, "There hasn't been any prostitute here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I couldn't find her. Also the people said there hasn't been any prostitute here." Judah said, "All right, let her keep the things, so that we won't be publicly shamed. I sent the kid, but you couldn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been acting like a whore. Moreover, she is pregnant as a result of her prostitution." Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned alive." When she was brought out, she sent this message before her father-in-law, "I am pregnant by the man to whom these things belong. Determine, I beg you, whose these are, the signet, the cord, and the staff." Then Judah acknowledged owning him. He said, "She is more righteous than I, because I didn't let her become the wife of my son Shelah," and he never slept with her again. When she went into labor, it became evident that she was going to have twins. As she was in labor, one of them put out his hand, and the midwife took his hand and tied a scarlet thread to it, saying, "This one came out first." But then when he withdrew his hand, and his brother came out, so she said, "Did you manage to break out first?" Therefore his name was Peretz, breaking out. Then out came his brother with a scarlet thread on his hand, and he was given the name Zerach, which means scarlet. Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him from the Yishlam, who had brought him there. Adonai was with Joseph, and he became wealthy while he was in the household of his master the Egyptian. His master saw how Adonai was with him, and that Adonai prospered everything he did. Joseph pleased him as he served him, and his master appointed him manager of his household. He entrusted all the possessions to Joseph. From the time he appointed him manager of the household and all his possessions, Adonai blessed the Egyptian's household for Joseph's sake. Adonai's blessing was on all he owned, whether in the house or in the field. So he left all of his possessions in Joseph's care. Because he had him, he paid no attention to his affairs, except for the food he ate. Now Joseph was well-built and handsome as well. In time, the day when his master's wife took a look at him and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused, saying to the master's wife, "Look, because my master has me. He doesn't know what's going on in this house. He has put all his possessions in my charge. In this house I am his equal. He hasn't withheld anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" But she kept pressuring him day after day. Nevertheless, he didn't listen to her. He refused to sleep with her or even be with her. However, one day, when he went into the house to do his work, none of the men living in the house were there indoors. She grabbed him by his robes and said, "Sleep with me." But he fled, leaving his robe in her hand, and got himself outside. When she saw that he had left his robe in her hand and escaped, she called to the men of the house and said to them, "Look at this! My husband brought a Hebrew to make a fool of us. He came in and wanted to sleep with me, but I yelled out loudly. When he heard me yelling like that, he left his robe with me and ran out." She put the robe aside until the master came home. Then she said to him, "This Hebrew slave you brought us came in to make a fool of me, but when I yelled out, he left his robe with me and fled outside." When the master heard what his wife said, as she showed him, "Here's what your slave did to me." He became furious. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, in the place where the king's prisoners were kept, and there he was in the prison. But Adonai was with Joseph, showing him grace and giving him favor in the sight of the prison warden. The prison warden made Joseph supervisor of all the prisoners in the prison, so that whatever they did there, he was in charge of it. The prison warden paid no attention to anything Joseph did, because Adonai was with him, and whatever he did, Adonai prospered. However, some time later it came about that the Egyptian king's cupbearer and baker gave offense to their lord the king of Egypt. Pharaoh became angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, so he put them in the custody of the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison in the same place where Joseph was kept. The captain of the guard chose Joseph to be with them, and he became their attendant while they remained in prison. One night the two of them, the king of Egypt's cupbearer and his baker, there in prison, both had dreams, each dream with its own meaning. Joseph came to them in the morning and saw that they looked sad. He asked Pharaoh's officers there with him in the prison of the master's house, "Why are you looking so sad today?" They said, "We each had a dream, and there's no one around who can interpret it." Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please." Then the chief cupbearer said to Joseph in his dream, "In my dream, there in front of me was a vine, and the vine had 3 branches. The branches budded, then it suddenly began to blossom, and finally clusters of grapes appeared. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and gave the cup to Pharaoh." Joseph said to him, "Here is the interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. You will be giving Pharaoh his cups as you used to when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when it goes well with you, and show me kindness, please, and mention me to Pharaoh, so that he will release me from this prison. For the truth is that I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and here too I have done nothing wrong that would justify putting me in this dungeon." When the chief baker saw the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, "I too saw in my dream, that there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. In the uppermost basket there were all kinds of baked goods for the Pharaoh, but the birds ate them out of the basket on my head." Joseph answered, "Here is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from off of you. He will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off you. On the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a party for all his officials, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer back to his position, so that he again gave Pharaoh his cup. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Nevertheless, the chief cupbearer didn't remember Joseph, but forgot him.